we get to feel like garbage. We get to feel like we can't come here.
The pain you felt is going to be nothing compared to the pain George Floyd felt to fight for his life during those minutes. I still can't breathe. I still can't breathe.
Stop being quiet. Stop being silent. It's time to have a voice. I can't breathe.
And this is for my great-great-grandma and my ancestors before that, because we're still fighting for inequality just like they were back in the 1900s. This is for them.
We've been struggling in this country for 500 years from racism. Racism, racism, racism.
And now my children are able to be born into a world where they're going to be seen, and they're going to be seen as an equal.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a special on ABC7 and KDOC TV. I'm Mark Brown. The Black Lives Matter protests have transformed into a movement around the world. In these extraordinary times, we are committed to expanding the conversation surrounding racial injustice and what is sparking so many people to take action. Tonight, an ABC7 Eyewitness News special, From Protests to Progress, a conversation on the future of race, justice, and social equity in Southern California. We're going to hear from a number of voices tonight. We are hoping that this will be a productive conversation, and our goal here is to leave you with concrete steps we can all take to move forward. Our conversation begins with three community leaders tonight. Actress, singer, star of Blackish, Jennifer Lewis has played the role of mom very often, leading to her to write her memoir, The Mother of Black Hollywood. She uses her social media platform as a means of being an activist. Baron Davis, a two-time NBA All-Star, formerly with the Clippers. He grew up in Los Angeles, went to UCLA. His jersey number 85 referenced 85th Street. He is now an actor, a businessman, and an activist. And Dr. Alyssa Richardson, an assistant professor at the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. She explored the lives of 15 journalist activists in her dissertation, Bearing Witness While Black, African Americans, Smartphones, and the New Protest, #Journalism. We're going to get to the issue of policing in a few minutes. I want to begin, though, with the discussion about race. Cities across the country erupted, including here in Los Angeles, not only because of the death of George Floyd, but because of a long systemic problem of African Americans being mistreated by police and other institutions. We begin with Ms. Lewis, if we can. This has been a long fight. Does it seem any different this time, or does this seem very familiar to you?
Well, it is familiar. As an artist, I know that it's very important for me to express myself. And I just want to say to the peaceful protesters, don't stop. This is not just a movement. It is a moment in history. It's your time. This is your revolution. I want you to know that my generation is behind you. I want you just not to stop. You know, I've been saying this all day, and I was criticized for it, but I mean it because that's how deep it goes inside of me. I wish that my generation had done more. We did our best, but personally, I wish I had been old enough to march, to sing, to take the dogs and hoses on the front line. So I say to the peaceful protesters out there, we're behind you, and don't you stop.
Baron Davis, why did it seem that white America seemed so reluctant to believe that police brutality and unequal treatment was so pervasive? I mean, this has been a discussion that's been going on for so many years, and yet people would say that this, you know, they'd hear about an incident. It's just this one incident. It doesn't mean that this is a pervasive thing. What do you think changed here?
You know, I would say a lot of times the way we live our lives based with a lot of things to do, a lot of distractions. And so things that happen in the media, they kind of come and go. I think for the first time when COVID hit, we were all, you know, basically in our house, right? And we didn't have jobs. We didn't have, you know, no realistic view of what the future was looking like for us. And, you know, being trapped inside your house forces you to deal with your issues, right? Mm-hmm. It forces you to deal with your family, right? And for that moment, everybody in the world that was quarantined had a moment to feel themselves under that police officer's knee. And that humanized George Floyd, right? And that humanized, you know, and stop people to see like, hey, Black America and Black people have been going through this since the beginning of time. Enough is enough.
It's interesting you mentioned humanize George Floyd, because, just that alone by itself, the fact that African Americans seem to have to be humanized in order to get empathy. Is that what you mean by that? I mean, you talk about how he was humanized, and a lot of folks have said that.
Yeah, for the longest of time, if you look at, the previous murders before that, we as Black people in America, we've been yelling and screaming and raising our fists and, saying, look at what the police is doing, look what the system is doing to us. And, for the first time, everybody in the world had an opportunity to feel like what it feels, to feel what it feels like to be Black, right? To not know what, your future is, to be locked in your house, to not know what a job, to not know what opportunity is, to have the system fail you, right? And so, everyone, including all Americans, really for the first time, everybody was on an equal playing field as far as being in their house. And so when you start to come up out of that and realize the advantages and the disadvantages that we've had over the history of time, right? People, who are friends with Black people, other races that can sympathize with Black people, started to stand up and say, hey, enough is enough, right? Because we had the time to look and reflect.
Awakening. This is a huge awakening. Huge. People are waking up. Changes are being made. That's why I say to the protesters, don't stop. The anti-lynching bill has been passed. The 4 officers were arrested. We are making progress. I could go on and on with the list, but I certainly want to share the mic because y'all know I can go on for an hour.
Oh, yeah. Well, I wish we had more time. I want to get to Dr. Richardson, too, because, the Rodney King, everybody thought, I did too. I covered that, of course, when it happened. The beating of Rodney King back in 1991. Hey, it's on video. Now here's the evidence. And then the officers were acquitted. LAPD, since then, body cameras have been instituted. A lot of these incidents, of course, have been caught on video. These things, though, still keep happening. Why is that?
In the book, I really talk about 3 overlapping eras of oppression and domestic terror, is what I call it, against African Americans. And we say this has been happening a long time because it has. And I talk about slavery, which then mutated and gave way to lynching, which then mutated to what we have now, which is police brutality. And through each of those eras, African Americans have been crying out, using the technology of their day to bear witness. And this is a different moment, because in the past, when slaves were whipped, they could not watch. African Americans could not be present. You had to put your head down. Hollywood has depicted that brilliantly in scenes like 12 Years a Slave, where Chiwetel Ejiofor is literally hanging from a tree and no one can look. Same thing with lynching. We could not be present when our loved ones were being lynched. There was a photographer there, but that photographer was there to take pictures and then make postcards of our humiliation, of our death, of our last moments, which should have been sacred. So this is a real turning point, because for the first time, African Americans can use their technology to be in that moment and say, I will not leave you. I will not let a wrong narrative be told about how you passed away. I won't let you go through this alone.
I will say your name. I will say your name.
17 years old, though, Darnella Frazier should be upheld and supported, because these kind of witnessing are so fraught. She put her body on the line to capture this. So to say that these things that we're not making progress is not true, because definitely we are starting to see changes already. But I think it's that notion of power and the errant way that someone can still be watched and still be filmed and not feel an ounce of conviction when they are literally crushing the life out of someone.
Oh my God, the arrogance on his face.
The facial expression haunts me.
A 14-year-old girl was filming that.
Yes.
And then there was a senator that said, well, why didn't people jump in? You can't jump in when a policeman is holding a gun.
Not at all.
All right.
Not at all.
And as part of
Absolutely
that conversation, we look toward those who make policy and who implement policy. And we want to bring in LA Mayor Eric Garcetti because he has a unique perspective on the protests concerning this issue. He's watched them unfold along with all of us. He's had protesters expressing their displeasure with him in front of the mayor's house. And as you see here, he's also taken part. He took a knee. He told the crowd, "We all want justice for George Floyd." Now, earlier today, I spoke with the mayor about the movement. City Council discussing at this moment trimming $150 million from the LAPD. Where do you think that money should go?
Well, we have to meet this moment and not miss this moment. I think we've seen one public health emergency with COVID-19. We've got another public health emergency that is of the racism that is in Los Angeles and across this country. I think we put so much on the backs of our police officers to solve mental health and homelessness and other issues, which we could be investing in actually preventing these problems from happening and from having alternate ways of dealing with them. We underfund our schools. We don't have some of our youth jobs for enough of our Black and brown youth. We see that people don't just die with a knee at their neck like George Floyd did so horribly, but there's an economic knee, a health knee, all these knees on the necks of Black Americans.
I'm not sure if you caught the president this morning talking about his executive order urging police departments to set new standards for professionalism. Was there anything in the president's message today that you found helpful or that could help the city of Los Angeles?
Well, it's good to see a lot of people stepping on board with the idea of constitutional policing and community-based policing. But this administration has been extremely slow, has not had any police consent decrees in the country, has really fanned the flames of racism in this country. So while I welcome anybody to this, we're not going to wait for the White House to give us permission on continuing to do things like outlawing chokeholds, calling for independent prosecution, making sure that we have the right training, making sure that we have the right tactics, and looking at alternatives to policing when it comes to public safety, because I think that's where the country is headed, with or without the White House. What about the community? What is it that the community is responsible for here that could help the atmosphere and make some changes? Well, I would reframe it. I mean, I think, first of all, the burden of racism in America shouldn't just fall on the shoulders of Black Americans. I think one of the most marvelous things I've seen out there in the last few weeks is a recognition, as many of us had before, that this has to be owned by all of us. So I don't think it's the community's responsibility. They're not even at the starting line equally to other parts of the town. I think it is government's responsibility and our collective responsibility to really redistribute resources and to put our money where our mouth is. And that's why I'm so proud of the council and myself stepping up and saying LA will do the difficult, often criticized work of saying, maybe in this moment we accelerate that. We take some money, yes, from the police department and other departments to put it in people and to put it in Black communities and to put it into the development of safety instead of just the suppression of crime. Why did it take a crisis like this to take this sort of an action when it seems to make so much sense? It didn't. And I'm really glad that we have the backing of this moment. These things, if we just think that this is a moment about policing, we're missing the impact of racism in America. This is about our economy. This is about health. This was before this crisis about seeing that Black people in Los Angeles were dying at twice the rate of their population from COVID-19 and doing something about it by surging testing where Black people live and reducing that, cutting that in half already. So, if you're not living your life looking at this country through a racial equity prism, you're going to miss it. But the wonderful thing about this moment is a lot of people, as we say, are woke. But now you can't just be woke. It's time to get out of bed and do something. All right, Baron Davis, first of all, should we retire the word woke now that the mayor of Los Angeles is using it? Do you think the mayor gets it? And do you think what you heard from him is enough?
No. We got to see some action. And I think, LA has, been probably one of the most segregated cities to live in, since I've been living, in my 40 years. And so when you think about the people in Watts, when you think about the people in Compton and South Central Los Angeles, none of those resources, right, have been going to the public schools and in education. None of those resources have been going into the parks and the recreations, right? And so the little that they do, and government does, it takes too much time to really implement the programs. And then the people, to me, that they're tagging are people that have nothing to do with our communities. They're not close to the community. They're not close to the people. The police are, you know, we've always said that, has always acted as another gang in LA. And, you know, when you're growing up, you look at the police as somebody who is supposed to protect and serve you. And so, you know, I would say to the mayor and, you know, to everyone else is when kids can walk out of their house in South Central Los Angeles and go to Drew Middle School and Fremont High School and walk there and feel like LA is their own and these streets are their own, then that's when we actually see action. And until then, you know, it's really buzzwords and catchphrases and, you know, woke should be retired because we're not woke, right? If we were woke, we would actually be doing the actions. We'd be funding the foundations and really distributing the wealth, especially in LA, and using LA as an example for the rest of America.
I want to really quickly ask this of Ms. Lewis. Is it, you know, the opponents of this, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying he's absolutely right. Mm-hmm. And I met Barron after I did Charlemagne the God's show, that's a political show also. I told him, the athletes are the gladiators of our time. They have to stand up. And I wrote a poem that said, take away their fun before they shoot your son. I believe that when we go back, we all should take a knee. We are not disrespecting the flag. We are holding it up because it says the land of the brave and free. I believe that everybody should take a knee right now because that is protesting peacefully.
Okay. All right. We're going to have.
I want to say this, Mark, because it's very important. We lack leadership right now.
Absolutely.
All fronts.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We have somebody in the White House that's trying to divide this country, and nobody wants a war. That we cannot be divisive. It is time to come to the table. And like Barron said, and the doctor said, we've got work to do.
Okay, we're going to continue.
We're going to. My friends call me that are very wealthy. They want to know, what can I do? Well, all you billionaires, build some youth centers.
Right.
Put your money where your mouth is.
We're going to talk about what is next, the next steps that need to happen, along with as we continue our discussion. We thank you all for joining us, Barron Davis, Alyssa Richardson, and Jennifer Lewis. We'll be right back with more of that. A lot of people saying the next step is to defund the police. The LA City Council took up that matter today. So what does that mean? Up next, we're going to talk with LAPD Chief Michael Moore about that. And you won't want to miss this.
It's like pouring gasoline and striking a match. It's not protest anymore. Now it's a full-blown riot.
Let It Fall, Los Angeles, 1982 to 1992 is a documentary about the civil unrest that took place in LA following the Rodney King case. Director John Ridley says there are some parallels to today's protests, but he's hopeful that things are actually changing.
Life for people of color is not going to be great tomorrow or the next day. There's still so many things that folks are going to have to endure, but you see the multitudes of individuals who are lending their voices, lending their bodies, quite frankly, putting flesh in the game so that they too can say, hey, we're here physically, we're ready to listen, and we're ready to look at spaces and try to figure out, are there things that we can do better?
Let It Fall, Los Angeles, 1982 to 1992 airs at 8 o'clock tonight on ABC7 right after this hour. Our conversation will continue after this. defunding the police, disbanding the police. What do these terms actually mean?
We're calling for defunding the police. We're making sure we're coming for his job because he is culpable.
There's not been a lot of accountability. And so what we're asking is, what are these officers going to do on a direct level? If you see somebody brutalizing somebody, if you see somebody hurting somebody, well, you got to enforce the law.
Statistics from the LAPD show the number of use of force incidents has been steadily increasing since 2015. 9% of Los Angeles residents are African American, but 36% of the suspects against whom force was used were black. LA Police Chief Michael Moore is a 36-year veteran of the LAPD. He's been chief there for 2 years, and he joins us now live. And Chief, the first thing I want to ask you about is those use of force statistics. Why is force used against African Americans at more than 3 times our portion of the population of LA?
Well, first of all, the use of force numbers you referenced are our lowest level of force. Our officer-involved shootings have actually dropped 46% in the last 5 years, and they're 30-year plus lows. We do see the instances of low levels use of force, primarily bodily force or physical force, and those have increased, and they do disproportionately have an impact on black men, particularly black men. When we look at the underlying influences of this, we've looked at and found increased levels of mental health, as well as a large proportion of these increases are in people experiencing homelessness. We know in the last 5 years that the homeless population here in Los Angeles, the unsheltered population, has grown steadily, and our engagement with that population has also grown. It's a time where we've tried to counteract that with mental health intervention training, with added tools of de-escalation and command and control. But I'm really welcoming the call right now, and I really hope that we seize this moment to find the opportunity and to find the will to find outreach workers and care workers, community care workers, who can work with this troubled, with a population of people experiencing homelessness that need services, and which today at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning, well, typically is a police officer, and that needs to change.
All right, which brings us to this whole question of defunding the police. You know, some people are seizing on that as people who want to eliminate the police department. I don't think that's really a serious consideration, but LA City Council deciding, or will be deciding, on whether to remove $150 million from your budget of about $1.8 billion to move those services or add services in other areas, including, we presume, outreach type workers to deal with homeless people, to deal with people who might be mentally ill, and take some of that pressure off of your officers. Are you in favor of that?
Absolutely. We're looking at every aspect of our operation and welcome the opportunity to take responsibilities that really belong to Department of Mental Health, that belong to LASA, that belong to other service organizations that should be helping and should be providing services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I believe that when those services are bolstered and they exist, that our ability to focus on our primary role, but also allowing us to reimagine policing in Los Angeles away from an idea of containment or suppression to one of guardianship, which means our ability to engage in our communities in building trust. Our Community Safety Partnership Program just recently completed research that showed that our engagement in that partnership at a local neighborhood level builds not only trust in the police, but makes for safer communities. So this is a moment in time that I welcome the opportunity for us to have this call to action that looks seriously at what public safety means in Los Angeles and across this country, what we've asked policing to do throughout the ages, and redefine that. And I welcome the changes I see on the national level with Congresswoman Bass's efforts of justice reform, increasing accountability. I welcome what we see with our Attorney General and our state level, and also our local leaders looking at charter reform that will allow us to improve our disciplinary process and our accountability. So this is a call to action, and I look so much forward to the energy of actually seeing it delivered, and at the same time repurposing law enforcement and LAPD, so as it goes out in its guardianship of building trust, that it does so in a manner that provides for the safety of our community, but also addresses issues of violence and other serious crimes that are occurring in and across Los Angeles.
We have a question from an Eyewitness News viewer at Laraya Nicole sent us this question. How do you see the future of policing with new agencies specialized for different issues? I think we kind of touched on that, having someone else respond to people with mental health issues as opposed to a police officer with a weapon.
Absolutely. What we have seen in this COVID-19 pandemic is that the nature of policing can change and must change to the environmental challenges. And this point that we're in here today, at this moment of the social inequities and the injustices that has occurred, offers us that same opportunity to go back and challenge our framework, challenge the way in which we've looked at policing, what we've measured, and determine what are the things that we should not be doing. And that's where the department, and I know under the leadership of Mayor Garcetti and this city council, we're all of us are joined in the interest of the safety of the city and the future of the city, which in my belief is a different LAPD and particularly a huge investment that needs to occur for outreach and engagement by people who can provide mental health services, that can provide violence interruption, that can deal with neighborhood disputes and other matters that don't require a police officer, that doesn't require a gun and a badge. And I look forward to seeing that come to fruition.
I wanted to ask you a question about Black Lives Matter. Their official policy is, as we have set up this panel, we wanted to have live discussions involving you and a lot of people. Black Lives Matter folks told us that they will not sit on a panel with you or any other representative of a police department. What's your response to that? It's been their policy for 7 years, we're told. What's your response to that?
It's unfortunate. I think that the earlier remarks of Ms. Jennifer Lewis, that as a country we need to come together, we need to unify, we need to find an opportunities to move forward together. The efforts of Black Lives Matter to represent Black men and women who have suffered injustices and inequalities and have suffered at the hands of law enforcement over the course of our long history doesn't escape me. But I think that each of us own a responsibility to the causes and values in which we represent to step towards a common table, a round table that we can share and we can move forward in a manner to make this country truly make a difference in this moment that we have. It cannot escape us again.
I've talked with Connie Rice, who has, as you know, has sued the LAPD any number of times. She's a civil rights attorney here in LA. She has since kind of joined with you to try to make reforms within the department. What she has said is that the brass, people like you, people from the captain level and above, get it in terms of the need for interaction with the community, in terms of the need to change the way that the culture of it is. But what you have at the rank and file level is something different. And even though this is a very diverse police department with some 64% people of color, you still have questionable uses of force. You had an officer charged late last week with the beating of a homeless man. What do you do to change that? How do you change that? Is it a matter of screening to get people in with a different mindset? How do you change the culture within a police department from one of suppression to one of cooperation?
It's what we reward. It's what we identify as our most important strategies, our most important avenues in which we go about public safety. And in Los Angeles, in years past and decades ago, that was a matter of suppression. It was a matter of putting mass resources, uniform resources into neighborhoods, and the over-policing that came from there only damaged and undermined our very standing and the efforts of men and women that were there to protect those communities. Today, we've shifted our way away from that mode of policing. In the constitutional policing and in community policing, it's a matter of how we build trust. It's not how fast we respond to a radio call. It's not how many arrests that we can make. It's what kind of trusting relationships do we have in those neighborhoods? Do we know the people in the communities that make up those neighborhoods? And are we invested in an effort together, the shared responsibility of their safety? The Community Safety Partnership, which we now have in 9 separate areas of the city of Los Angeles, has shown over the last 9 years that when we take an opportunity of officers selected, trained, and positioned in these small neighborhoods, the bonds that they establish with local residents, the safety that is encountered, that is built, and the trust that is endured is where the future of policing in Los Angeles is. Our movement from here is to take the energy behind this desire that we reform policing, increase responsibilities, increase accountabilities, increase the transparency, certainly training to instill to eliminate and ensure there's no place for bias in our work, but really the reimagining of ensuring our community safety partnerships and our engagement at the local level, that we have the means in which to achieve that. That's the future of policing in Los Angeles. I look forward to the broad coalition that's being formed that talks about reimagining and actually identifying areas that we can take off of our plate and give to other parts of our social programs to help improve and actually change what we've seen in the past.
All right, LA Police Chief Michael Moore, thank you for joining us. Up next here, we're going to be joined by two leaders fighting on different fronts, Representative Karen Bass in Congress and community activist Alberto Retana. We're going to talk about Sunday's massive All Lives Matter march, and we'll ask All Black Lives Matter march, and we'll ask them about the responsibility of corporate America in the quest for social equity. A striking scene in the nation's capital. Wearing African kente cloth scarves, congressional Democrats knelt in the Capitol building for 8 minutes and 46 seconds as a tribute to George Floyd. Members of the party, led by Representative Karen Bass, introduced new legislation to change policing nationwide. We continue our discussion now, from protest to progress, a conversation on the future of race, justice, and social equity in Southern California. I'm Mark Brown. Joining me now is Congressional Black Caucus Chair Karen Bass, who is leading a federal package of police reforms, and Alberto Retana, who is the president and CEO of Community Coalition. That's a group that's been fighting for social justice in L.A. and South L.A. in particular for some 30 years. Let's begin with the Congresswoman. Ms. Bass, thank you for joining us. What is in the legislation that you are pushing ahead?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Mark. It's great to see you and great to be in LA, at least virtually. The Justice and Policing Act, which we are changing the name to add George Floyd's name tomorrow, a specific request from his brother, contains several components. There is a part that deals with accountability that will essentially reduce what would be required to prosecute an officer away from willful intent, meaning what is in the officer's mind, to reckless, which means it doesn't matter what was in his mind. Changing qualified immunity, which allows officers to act with impunity. And if you think about the murder of George Floyd, that officer was looking dead in the camera while he slowly killed him over 8 minutes, as though he didn't even care. Having a national database so that an officer that is inappropriate or kills someone in one area would not be hired in another area. Tamir Rice would have graduated high school this month if there had been a national registry and that police chief had not hired him. George Floyd and Eric Gardner would be alive if chokeholds had been banned. So those are a few things that are in the bill. Breonna Taylor would be alive because no-knock warrants would be banned. One of the measures that's in the bill that I'm the most excited about is a measure that provides grants to community-based organizations to begin to re-envision policing, to look at the budgets and resources in a city and say what is really needed. Police officers complain all the time that because we have divested from cities, we have left community problems to be criminalized, and we leave officers to pick up the pieces. Those are some of the features of the comprehensive legislation, but it is still nowhere near enough.
All right, and Mr. Ratana, you and the Congresswoman are connected in that she is formerly and you are currently chair of the Community Coalition, which tries to influence policy here at the local level. And you heard from the chief a little while ago. Do you have a message to our local policymakers, whether it's the chief of police, the sheriff, the mayor, on what you would like to see done and what you think they maybe haven't done yet?
Yeah, I think that it was great to hear him talk about the need to reinvest. What we want to see is him actually and the city actually taking those words serious. There's been a lot of discussions, a lot of promises, but we still haven't seen enough. We're in a critical moment to radically transform the system in our favor, to no longer use law and order, social control, and repression by the means to which we achieve peace and freedom in communities like South Los Angeles. As a society, and this organization that Karen founded, the Congressmember founded, part of the dream was to reverse that infatuation and addiction by society to meet mental health needs, houselessness, youth with armed bodies of men. We need to honestly look in the mirror and ask ourselves whether or not $1.8 billion to the LAPD is enough, and the probably hundreds of millions of dollars in settlements that we pay from police misconduct and abuse. Black people are pulled over 4 times more than whites and produce less contraband. LAPD as a civilian has killed a civilian once per week since 2012. Officers are rarely prosecuted, hardly ever fired. We're calling on the mayor to not take half-hearted measures, to really think about not just the divestment, which is important, but also the investment. One last thing on this, Mark, and thank you for having me on. After the civil unrest, which the Congressmember can really speak to, there was a $600 million investment known as Rebuild LA.
You're talking about 1992.
In 1992.
Right.
We are not, that's at about $1 billion in today's dollars. No one is talking about that kind of investment. We're talking about a $150 million cut, which still keeps the LAPD at above 51%. And we're not having a conversation about real investments. We're calling on the city to at least invest $500 million in Black communities around economic development, youth development, healing centers, the kinds of things that our residents have been calling for. And I'm not talking about just the young people that are protesting, which are doing their job, and the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm talking about mom and pops, aunts and uncles, grandmas and grannies that want to see a different kind of investment in our community that they deserve.
In many ways, the struggles of the LGBTQ plus community parallel those of African Americans, and the links between the two are well documented. People of color were at the forefront of the Stonewall protests more than a half-century ago, and just yesterday, in a landmark ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which prohibits discrimination on the basis of race and sex, also applies to gay or transgender people. This historic act born out of the fight for racial equality, which brings us to the scene in Hollywood here on Sunday. Members of both communities joining forces for one of the biggest demonstrations in our area, calling for social justice reform, and voices from the LGBTQ plus community staging a massive march and rally. About 40,000 people there demanding change. The message, all Black lives matter. One local activist says while yesterday's Supreme Court ruling is a big victory, it also underscores how much work is still needed.
It's an important reminder that legal equality does not always translate into lived equality, and that we have to do the hard work of ensuring that all of our community, and particularly Black, Indigenous, and people of color from the LGBT community, have the same sort of lived equality as legal equality. And that's going to be a significant aspect of how we move forward. As we continue to get our legal rights, we still know that there will be challenges, and we have to make sure that all of our community has access to those same protections.
Mr. Ratana, what do you make of this stronger alliance and this inclusion with the LGBT community and others?
I mean, I think what we're seeing right now is a beautiful thing, both in terms of the intersection and the connection, and to stand up for, in particular, the number of Black trans men and women that have been killed and murdered, and to stand up and say in defense of all Black lives is incredibly important. The multiracial nature of the movement today, that we still have Black folks and Black folks leading, but we have white folks and brown folks and Indigenous folks and Asian folks all standing together in defense of Black lives. That is a historic moment in the clock of the United States history, and we have to do it justice. If we don't do enough, if we only take on half half-hearted measures, especially in a place like Los Angeles. As progressive as we are, then we don't do the movement justice. It is a beautiful thing that we have to embrace. It's a beautiful moment to be living in America on that side. It's also an awful and tragic moment that in the face of the multiracial movement we still have individuals that are being murdered and killed at the hands of armed, uniformed police officers that should be met by other folks. And that's what's at the heart of this moment that we're in. We have to treat this global pandemic of racism with the antidote, which is about investment in our communities, not more police.
And when you speak about the moment, I want to ask Congresswoman Bass, the president saying that he has recognized this moment as well, and he has signed an executive order with regard to law enforcement. What do you make of the president's executive order?
Well, first of all, the president hasn't recognized anything. The purpose of his executive order was an attempt to undermine the major bill that we're putting forward tomorrow. But I think the good news about the president and the Republicans is they've stole the major parts of our bill, which means they know that this is legitimate legislation. They just took the teeth out of it. Why in the world do we need to study chokeholds? Why do we need a database of no-knocks? So I don't believe that the president has done much of anything. It was theatrics. That's what he knows how to do best. And then he is going to absolutely offend us all by giving a speech on race written by Stephen Miller, of all people. And he is from Santa Monica. And I predict, given who Stephen Miller is, it is going to be an anti-immigrant speech. And he's going to try to say that he is helping the Black community by being against immigrants. And it's not going to go anywhere. He is choosing to give this speech in Tulsa, Oklahoma, on the anniversary of the 99th anniversary of the massacre of Black people in Tulsa, Alabama, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so I am sorry, but I don't take anything of his efforts today other than theatrics. And that is what he has specialized in for the last 3.5 years.
A lot of big corporations not talking about theatrics, but they're talking about dollars. A lot of big brands have spoken out in the wake of George Floyd's killing. Many more have remained silent, though. How many actually support the Black Lives Matter movement? Well, we have a short list of companies that have expressed some type of solidarity. Nike, Amazon, Starbucks among them. However, some observers are skeptical. They're cautioning against brand activism, as it's called. Businesses have been increasingly embracing the concept here. They're taking a stand on social, environmental, or political issues. But a deeper look may reveal a different picture. Nike made a pledge of some $40 million over the next 4 years to support the Black community in the United States. But as of last year, fewer than 10% of its vice presidents at Nike were Black. So what role do corporations play in this movement? Karen Bass?
Well, I mean, I think that as you revealed, when you talked about the executives, it's not there. When you talk about their board of directors, it's not there. I think their $40 million will certainly be welcome, but we want to know where it's going to go and who's going to make those decisions. What level is the community involved in that? So the corporations absolutely need to take responsibility. They make billions of dollars off of the Black community. And so it is time to return the resources that they have acquired, the profits that they have acquired.
And Mr. Ratana, as whether it's at the corporate level, the social level, the political level, as we move forward here, this is what we're trying to get to, is what would you like to see happen? What needs to happen?
Well, we would like to see the mayor continue to not hide from the public and take a strong stance in support of more action. We're seeing brave actions by the city council. Council member Herb Weston put an amazing piece of legislation with Council President Neri Martinez around moving resources and moving attention to other to mental health and to deal with homelessness outside of law enforcement. We need to see more from the mayor. He's been hiding, and we need to hear him come out. We need to see him make a real investment. I've already talked about, we're asking at the very least for a $500 million investment in Black communities. We put a plan in front of him, and Black Lives Matter has been putting larger demands around what are we going to do around LAPD? Like, for example, pretextual stops and the way in which officers are pulling people over at such a high rate, putting them on the curb, dehumanizing. It's not just about how officers are killing people. It's about how we're treated and how we're preyed upon in our communities. Those are kinds of things that we've been asking from the city for over a year now. We haven't seen any action. I think now's the time for him to move forward on that. Real investments, real commitment to changing the way in which the law enforcement is being out there patrolling our community. And at the end of the day, what we really want to see for me, the people to continue to be on the streets, continue to demand, continue to push, because as Frederick Douglass had said, without power concedes nothing without a demand, and that demand can only be met with organized people on the street. So if we can just keep doing the work, I think we're going to get to where we need to be.
All right, Alberto Rotana and Representative Karen Bass, we thank you very much for joining us. Defunding the police, is that the answer? Dr. Melina Abdullah of Black Lives Matter says yes. Coming up, she will explain why. For the past 6 years, the group Black Lives Matter has been one of the most emphatic voices in the movement against police abuse. Joining us now is Dr. Melina Abdullah, the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. Dr. Abdullah, thank you for joining us. The LA City Council today took up the idea of defunding the police to the tune of about $150 million out of a budget of $1.8 billion. Is that enough? Is it a right step in the right direction? And where should the money go?
So no, it's absolutely not enough. However, we're really encouraged by the motion put forward by Herb Wesson and Nuri Martinez that seeks to move police out of situations that they have no business being in the first place. So calling mental health workers when there's a mental health issue, calling houseless services, providing housing for people who are on the streets. So we think that that is an encouragement. We want to lift up that we, along with People's Budget LA, which is a coalition of groups that we brought together, just presented to City Council yesterday. And so this advancement actually comes in response to what it is we were asking for when we presented People's Budget, the People's Budget to Los Angeles City Council.
And so I gather $150 million is not enough. What would be an appropriate amount, and what is the objective here with regard to the police and removing that amount of funding?
So we know that $150 million is really just the amount that the mayor had increased LAPD budget by, right? So you don't get to increase it and then say, I'm going to give it back and then think that that's something, right? That's not a win. We are adamant about defunding the police. And what that means is we shouldn't have an LAPD budget that you're right, it's $1.87 billion. But then when you add in the additional spending also from the general fund, you actually have a total of $3.15 billion. And so it's really important that we think about budgeting as a zero-sum game. When they're giving LAPD $3.15 billion, they're not spending on housing. When they give LAPD $3.15 billion, they're not spending on mental health resources. When we did our survey and asked Angelenos, and 25,000 of them, Angelenos responded, we said, what do you want to spend on? And Angelino said the first thing at the top of their list of priorities is meeting the universal needs of people, making sure everyone has housing, good jobs, quality after school programs. After that, they wanted to invest in the built environment, meaning that all our neighborhoods should have parks and libraries for our children and ourselves to kind of be in and rejuvenate in. And then finally, what they wanted to invest in is restorative approaches to public safety. So we heard the mayor and the police chief kind of appropriating some of our language around reimagining public safety. Reimagining public safety recognizes that the proper approach to public safety is first meeting people on the front end, providing for their needs, and two, when there are issues, thinking about how to address communities in ways that actually restore and transform those communities. Speaking first with the victims about what they need to be made whole, and then thinking about how we build healthy communities. And so defunding the police.
You do believe there is a place for someone to answer the 911 call when there's a burglary or when there's a robbery or when somebody's car gets broken into. I mean, the critics of the defund the police movement say what you really want to do is abolish the police, and I don't think anybody's really trying to do that, right?
Oh, some people are absolutely trying to abolish the police, because if we think about what policing is, and this is the professor in me, it's really important that people understand that those calls for abolition are rooted in real logic, right? Policing in this country evolved from slave catching. I didn't make that up. You can go look it up for yourself. Read people like Khalil Gibran Muhammad out of Harvard University, who documents the history of policing. Scholars like Angela Davis talk about the slave catching and policing being an uninterrupted chain of oppression, right? So as ridiculous as it would be to say, let's reform chattel slavery, when you talk about a vestige of chattel slavery like policing, you also need to be talking in terms of abolition, not simple reform. Now, here's the piece I think you're pointing to. No one is saying that we don't want to have strong systems of public safety. Just that when you talk about public safety, we can't reduce it to policing. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, I think that does. That explanation is something a little more clear than what some of your opponents might be putting out. Why no appearance on our panel with the police chief? We know it's the policy of Black Lives Matter that you don't appear on a panel live with members of police agencies. Why is that?
So we really believe in challenging the system of policing formally. And so we see the police chief every single Tuesday at police commission meetings. We are there faithfully. We have never missed in the 7 years of our existence. And we put forward requests, recommendations, and demands. The police chief has chosen not to respond to those demands. And so some of the things that he's saying, using kind of PR language, are really untrue. And so when we talk about things like the murder of Grishario Mack inside the Crenshaw Baldwin Hills Mall, the police commission actually recommended that those officers, they found those officers out of policy. The police chief chose to say, well, those officers who stole the lives of a Black man in front of hundreds of shoppers just need more training, right? So we want to put our requests, our demands on record. We don't want to go back and forth kind of using media to win points. We would rather make those requests in writing, and we have, and he's chosen not to respond to them.
All right, Dr. Melina Abdullah, Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, thank you very much for joining us. Capri Maddox, the new executive director of the LA Department of Civil and Human Rights. My colleague Leslie Sykes spoke with her about what this new city department will do.
As you and I both know, racial inequality in this country is age-old. And as the director of this newly formed department, you are being tasked with addressing and identifying these inequities that are facing people of color. In your mind, what are the top problems that we're seeing and the top concern areas?
So specifically, commerce
education, employment, and housing. And when you think of commerce, we're talking about lending practices with banks for homeownership as well as business opportunities. I know that African Americans are 7 times less likely to have a loan issued to them compared to someone with the same credit that happens to be white. The secondary thing is in education. We know that when there are disparities in punishment, for example, with our students. I actually was a student that was suspended as a 7-year-old from a local school in our area, in the Los Angeles area. We know that African-American girls are 3 times as likely to be suspended from school compared to their white counterparts. We know, in addition, that in employment, we have disparities in hiring and disparities in punishment and firing. And then the last thing, housing, as we said earlier, the lending practices and redlining have been a problem systemically for many years. And it leads to the lack of generational wealth in our communities.
When we have looked back at over these past several weeks and seen the unrest that is occurring, it's clear that this is not just a moment. It's clear that it is a movement right now. What needs to happen to move these things forward?
This is a time, this is a moment. Basically, Leslie, if we don't fix this problem now, we will never fix it. We know that racism is an issue, but we have to address it because some of those people may not put their knee on your neck, literally, they may do it figuratively. And we need to be sure that we step up and address biases in commerce, education, housing, and employment.
We have seen the violence and the overt racism against Black people, but the institutional racism and the systemic racism is perhaps more insidious.
And when you think about racism, it's not always someone that's going to drive a car through a protest. Like the birdwatching incident, where we had an individual that, again, weaponized calling the police.
There is an African-American man, I'm in Central Park. He is recording me and threatening myself and my dog.
She knew that racism was prevalent enough that she could tell an African-American man that she was going to call the police on him to invoke fear in him. And she could also contact the police and let them know there's an African-American man present. That was to invoke a certain aggressive response. But you should keep in mind, Leslie, is this: that person also worked in banking. So we have people that have racist beliefs that are in our institutions, and we need anti-bias training, we need enforcement, and we also need to use these institutions to empower people of color to right the many, many wrongs of history.
Capri, Maddox, thank you so much for your time. We wish you all the best. Good luck in your plan and what you are about to do. Mark, back to you.
Leslie, thank you. So what do we do now? Over the course of this hour, we talked to Baron Davis, who said we need to distribute the wealth. We need to make our communities safe. Jennifer Lewis implored peaceful protesters to not stop what they're doing. LA Police Chief Michael Moore agreed with plans to redistribute millions from his police department's budget to support outreach and care workers to respond to mental health and homeless problems, and that we need to reimagine policing. Congresswoman Karen Bass renamed the bill she introduced to the George Floyd Law Enforcement Trust and Integrity Act. It will overhaul police practices from the federal level. The Community Coalition's Alberto Retana is calling on the city to invest $500 million in Black communities. And Black Lives Matter LA is supporting the People's Budget LA, which calls for shifting money away from policing into social services. This could have gone on for a lot longer than the hour that we had. We are committed to keeping the conversation going, and we're going to continue to look for ways to lift up all voices in the movement. Head to ABC7.com to tell us why you protest. Thank you for joining us on ABC7 and KDOC. And a big thank you to all of our guests. Let It Fall is next. I'm Mark Brown. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.